Welcome to Zen Footsteps. My podcast is designed to invite you to explore new perspectives and challenge the way you see the world. Through engaging conversations with thought-provoking guests, we're going to delve into the idea that you can transform your thinking and inspire personal growth. From redefining success to uncovering unconventional paths to fulfillment, each episode is a step towards expanding your mind and embracing the journey of discovery. So join us as we walk alongside innovators, thinkers, and change makers who can help you see life in a whole new light. Hi guys, and welcome to another fantastic episode on Zen Footsteps. And I've got a great guest today, Raymond E Foster. Now that is the name of a writer, and he is a writer, but actually he's more than a writer. I just want to read you his bio. It's quite fascinating. So Raymond is someone who's known a thing or two about building strong leaders and strong character. He's a retired law enforcement executive, a university professor, and a US Coast Guard, and he's a veteran of that. He's also spent years in Masonic leadership, but we're going to talk a lot about that today. This is helping others turn ancient tools and symbols into practical lessons for life today. Now, he's been recognized awards like the Grand Master Mason of the Year and the Hiram Award, and we'll talk a little bit about that because even just Hiram, we need to talk about that. He's also the author of The Temple Within, which is available on Amazon right now if you want to go and get it. I think it's also as an ebook. And he shares stories of wisdom, and he has a fresh take on how you can grow and lead and live with more purpose. Raymond, good morning, or was it good evening there, isn't it, I think?
Well, we're about to go into morning with me. 16 more minutes and I'll be in morning.
So whereabouts are you based then? Where's your area?
Well, I live in a town called San Dimas, which is in California. It is named after the patron saint of thieves. And so it's about 30 miles east of Los Angeles.
Wow, I think I've been to Chicago once, and that's about it. It was I rode the L or something. I went out with a girl, and her father was a professor at Northwestern University. So let's get straight into it. I want to go back a little bit. I want to go back before Masonics, and I want to get into that story about in law. So tell me a little bit about that. How did you fall into that?
Oh, well, becoming a policeman?
Yeah.
So that was a very long time ago, almost 50 years ago now. I tell people it's really the only other thing I was qualified to do at the time, I think, was lay railroad ties and be a police officer. But my father had been a police officer, and so I was raised in a neighborhood with lots of police officers. And it seemed like a natural career path for me at the
Mm.
time when I got out of the Coast Guard. And so I went in the Los Angeles Police Department. I was there for almost 25 years, and I retired at the rank of lieutenant. In fact, I retired almost a day or two after my first textbook was published, and I got an offer to teach at university. So that was kind of the transition from one career to the next. I call that my first lifetime. It was over, and then I was into the second, and now we're into the fourth version of me. So you're getting I don't know if the copy's getting weaker or not, but you're getting really a fourth copy. And that was, I get asked all the time, would you go back and be a police officer again? And I tell, if you'll make me 22 years old again, heck yeah, let's go. Because that was the most fun I think you could have. And I'll tell you, being a police officer, I met the Queen of England at the time. And the reason was I was partnered up with a fella that was a Bobby in London for years and immigrated to the US and became a police officer. And so for some reason, the Los Angeles Police Department thought it would be a good idea for him to meet the Queen when she came to Los Angeles in the mid 80s. And I was standing right next to him, met the Queen, and I now know that everything smells like wet paint, I think, around her because everything's been repainted.
It does. They literally fix everything. I mean, when I was nursing back in the day and she visited the hospital, that was the best thing ever because it meant finally we got all those upgrades done and all the painting done. So was that? Am I sort of right in saying in America there seems to be the family thing of the police where you come from an Irish ancestry or Scottish? Do you come from that background originally?
No, I'm more English probably than you are.
Oh
I'm
wow,
98%. Yeah, my family name goes back. We're in the Doomsday Book. I mean, we go back to,
wow.
yeah, it came over in 1615, and genealogy for a long time was a hobby. So no, I'm not. I have a little bit of Irish, but and it is a family thing. You're quite correct. And I don't know, it's something you grew up with. So that idea of
Mm,
shift work and the different things, it seems to come natural. And I think the same thing with any family. Doctors, lawyers,
mm.
steel workers, they all follow in their parents' footsteps.
It seems to be that. I mean, I'm glad I didn't follow to some extent in my father's footsteps because he was a spy. So that probably wouldn't have been very good. My earliest memory of my father is holding a gun that he used to sleep with under his pillow. He had a Luger. And those things are pretty, well, they're not great guns, are they? I used to have, I think I had a 45 because I was in South Africa. We had to really have guns everywhere we went. But yeah, as you probably know, 45's got a hell of a kick. So I do laugh when I see these programs with these people holding guns to the side, and I'm thinking if you hold a 45 to the side, it'll kick your head off. So let's go. I want to really talk a lot about your book, if that's okay. And I want to talk about connections between the Masonics and also your discoveries. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by is the symbology of the Masonics. So, when did you first become interested in the connection between the Masons' way of living life and how you thought this could translate into modern world?
I was 14 years old. I met my father-in-law, and he was a man. He introduced me actually to first, weirdly enough, Dianetics, but after that, it was the Plato's Republic. And we would have very long discussions, and he was a master mason. I didn't know that for several years. And so after I learned that he was a master mason, I was under the impression that masons were men who sat around and drank coffee and talked about these really deep subjects. I was wrong. But that's the impression that I had. And so for many, many years, I that's what I wanted to be, was a Mason. In fact, I actually got a job at university to teach introduction to philosophy before, or just before, or no, just after I became a master Mason. So philosophy had been had been seated in me a long time ago. And then when I became a Mason and I was exposed to the world, that world, I began to explore both of them together.
And so your father-in-law, he was a Mason, was he? Or
Yes.
okay, all right. So he introduced you to that. So for those who don't know, let's pretend we know nothing about Masonics, which actually a lot of people know nothing about. Let's be honest. Let's say that's the truth, right? They have this idea that we rule the world and have some sort of, power in government and everything else like that. And from my point of view, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is, for example, we Friday the 13th is a classic of that. The King of France was bankrupting the country, and in the middle of the night, he went and got the Knights Templars and he executed them or assassinated them, and a lot of them had to escape to Roslin in Scotland, and that was a break off of the Masonic order. Is that correct, as far as you know?
Well, there's some scholar, so there's some scholars who right now are doing backflips. There's some ties there because this is about 100 years difference. But really, what happens with the Knights Templar is that when Philip the Fair persecutes them and begins the arrest, he transmits that letter of transmittal over to England. And of course, the time the English are like, well, okay, and very slowly, because what the English king really wants to do is to take the properties himself. And so there are a few trials of Templars in England, and they're all found not guilty, but their property is still taken away. So at that point, it just became a property transfer scheme, really, for the crown. And because the English were slow, it gave them time to move north and into Scotland. And so many Knights Templars did a few things. They joined the Teutonic Knights, which were up in the German states. And the Teutonic Knights, they really found a thing. What they found was, the Knights Templar had been fighting the non-Christians or in the Middle East. So the Teutonic Knights began to fight the non-Christians in the Baltic area, and they were supported for many years that way. And so some of the Knights Templar became hospitallers. Some of them became other things. Masonry, the formation of what we think of masonry is really shrouded in history. It's the mist of history. But here's what we could say, I think, is that the idea of stonemasons is a deep, deep history that we can trace through the collegia in the Roman Empire, back through the Phoenicians into the Egyptians, and we can see in the history of architecture that stonemasons have been around a very long time. But so this is a deep, think of this as a tree, and it's a tree with a huge trunk with these deep, deep roots, and it's growing straight up. But then here's all this philosophy, and this, you've got Buddhism and you've got Plato and Aristotle, the Stoics, and they're vines, and they begin to wrap themselves around things. And one of the things they wrap themselves around very tightly in England in the early part of the 18th century is the Stonemasons Guild. And the Stonemasons Guild, which was operative masons, guys who worked in stone, they began to accept more and more non-operative masons. And there's lots of reasons they were doing this initially. But as they did this, men brought this philosophy into these lodges. And the philosophy is the vines, which wrapped itself around Freemasonry. And today, it's like these vines are in the tree and you can't tell the tree from the vines. But if you take a vine and you follow it, and you begin to see where this symbol came from and what it could potentially mean, that's how I think we study this. So that may help the idea that Freemasonry or the Masons come from the guilds in England. And at the time, in your history, the early part of the 18th century, when clubs were very popular, that's when the Royal Society for the Arts and Sciences, those things begin to form up. Freemasonry guilds is one of the things that forms up itself and becomes speculative masonry. And then with colonization, it just flourishes throughout the Western world, throughout the world that Britannia will conquer.
It's
So that's kind of
fascinating. Well, no, because when you say that, it's fascinating about a lot of people get hung up with Masonics in terms of recognition and secret ways to recognize each other. And as you know, any Mason joining, the one thing he won't do is disclose how that recognition is done, and rightly so. I think that I don't know why people have a problem with honoring, like, you were in the police force and you are told to behave in a particular way. Nobody questions that, and if you're joining a club, there are certain rules. Now, just for listeners to explain that in the days when you were going from place to place and building these beautiful churches and stuff in Europe, you can't just rock up and say, "Oh, I'm just a Mason." Well, how do they know? So they had to have ways of recognizing that they actually were where they were and their progression as a stonemason, basically. So that's my understanding where that came from, the secrecy. It wasn't to hide its secret. It was a way of, these days we'd probably come along and say, "Look, here's my CV or here's my credentials," right?
Well, if you think of it this way, what the secrecy and the modes of recognition are two separate issues. So the modes of recognition, there's two things I won't talk about. That's one is the modes of recognition. That's true. We have secret handshakes and passwords. We did a fellowcraft degree tonight at Lodge, and we taught a guy the passwords and the handshakes for that degree. And that's what we call the arts in Freemasonry. That's our arts. The other thing I won't talk about is specific ritual. In fact, in the Temple Within, one of the things in the introduction, I had to really cut this fine line between my obligation to keep things secret and my obligation as a scholar to explore them. So I took this tact. If a Masonic scholar had pursued something previous to me, then as far as I was concerned, the cat was out of the bag. The second was if it was a biblical passage, well, it's open source. So we can, if you read the book, my wife who read the book said it's my best writing yet, which I thought was a high compliment. It's my 8th book, by the way, and my 9th book came out 2 days ago. So um, it the passages on the bit you'll come across this essay on the book of Ruth, and you'll go, "Why are we here?" And I'll be talking about some lessons that are in the book of Ruth, and then I'll be shaving away some of the surface of it and going very deep into stuff. And what I tell people at the beginning is you can't really put this in context because you're not a Mason, but you can still grasp something out of this. And so I felt it was important for the Mason and the non-Mason both, or as I call it, the curious seeker, to be able to explore the topics that are layered in all the symbols. Because whether or not you're Mason, I think there's tools here that you can use. In fact, there are fabulous tools you can use to lead a richer life. And I really want to go back to secrecy. When we're talking 1721 was when the, or 1717 is when the Grand Lodge of London forms up, and it will become the Grand Lodge of England eventually. But when it does that in 1717, you got to remember that the first known guy we know that becomes, we know of an Englishman becoming what we call an opera, a speculative Mason, a guy just doing philosophy, is in 1640, and it's a guy named Asimov, right? That's like 70 years after Elizabeth's cutting people's heads off. Murder was state policy for believing something different. Think of that. That was state policy. We're going to murder you. Think of the fact that if you were a Lutheran, the Catholics would burn you out. If you were a Catholic, the Lutherans would burn you out. And then if you believed it differently, they would get rid of you. And so secrecy in discussing men who are beginning to meet again, they're getting 300 years ago. Masonry is not the only thing they're discussing. They're discussing governance. They're discussing politics. They're discussing all kinds of science. They're trying to work out what's alchemy and what's chemistry, right? What's math and what's geometry, what's philosophy and what's science. All these things are being worked out in secret because dangerous. You got to explore all ideas, and some ideas are dangerous to the crown. That's one reason we have secrecy. The second reason, I think the Masons were really smart. These men 300 years ago realized they knew that the great libraries in Alexandria had been burned down. They had seen it again. They had seen the Lutherans burn the icons and whole libraries, and the Vikings burn out entire libraries. If knowledge is written down, it can be burned up. Book burning in the 30s, even here in the United States. It wasn't 25 years ago. Somebody was using the fireplace in the, what do you call a fireplace in the basement of a place to make
The
heat.
boiler house.
The boiler house. They
Yeah.
used the boiler to burn books they didn't like. And this
Yeah.
not, that's like 25 years ago.
Mm.
So what Masons at the time decided was, what, if we don't write this down, if we pass it from mouth to ear and we keep it inside the man, it can't be destroyed again, because they were worried about this esoteric knowledge being destroyed. So it's secret because it's dangerous, right? To have different ideas. It's dangerous to talk about them. We want to keep it. We want to keep the knowledge. And here's the last thing. Some of this information actually can be detrimental to you if you don't learn it in order, right? If you don't take the degrees of Masonry 1, 2, 3, and you don't learn this information, it can be harmful to you in particular if you don't take it as a whole. So for those reasons, we maintain the secrecy. Now, all the symbolism is not secret, and I will discuss any of that, and I give wonderful tours. So is there a symbol you wanted to dive deep on?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things I want to pick up there was quite interesting. If you look at there's a technique called Kundalini, which is in the Masons. It's the same thing. It's different names basically. If we look at Yin and Yang, we look at the checkerboard of the Masons, black and white, masculine, feminine, up and down. So one of the things I find, especially if we go back, say for example, to India. And we look in India and we look at yoga, for example, they couldn't read and write. So, of course, they're going to have the symbology of an animal to represent. So a cobra, we know a cobra rises up. It's a particular, position that you do. But what's happened is the conventional, I call them a religion, but organized religion, comes along and then puts symbology of the serpent and the cobra and says it's evil. It's not evil. It's just a stretch. But people weren't literate then. And it was the way for them, to communicate. And I find, for example, Jacob's ladder in the Bible. That's a fascinating thing within the Masonics, Jacob's ladder, because when you understand that the rungs of Jacob's ladder connect to the energy centers, say in the Indian tradition, and we talk about the lower base energy of man, unrefined man. And as we go up the different energy centers, we open up to the refined man and dare I say it, God man. Do you know what I mean? The Christ one. And as in my normal job I work in healthcare. I look at the fact that we've got 33 vertebrae and we've got 33 degrees of initiation in the Masonics. It's not by chance. It's because if you look at the sacrum is solid, and that base man is solid. It's quite unrefined. And then, of course, as you go up the different vertebrae in the spine, they become thinner, they become more refined. And of course, when you get to the top and the pineal gland and the brain, everything's really soft. So that, from a symbology point, for me, is really fascinated me. So the symbol that I would really want to talk about, there's two symbols. Is one is the circle. Very you in London, if you go to London, you look up by the, if you ever come over, we must meet up. I'll show you around. But I always look up in London. There's Masonic symbols all over London, like literally. If you know what they are, they're all over the place. And so the circle is definitely one of them. And the other one is the triangle. Can we talk a little bit about those two symbols?
Well, are you taking the triangle or the square? Because they
Okay,
would be, the triangle looks like a square. Okay, so the first thing about the circle, right? Um, the circle in philosophy has lots of different meanings it conveys. When I so I have to have ground rules before we talk, because otherwise people get angry. Um, if I say something is mythic or mythological, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That
agreed.
means that it's so important that it's taken on a mythical status, right? So that means it's very important, but I'm using it like the if I say something is a legend, then that's probably something we've made up and we're kind of making it mean something, right? So we talk about in Masonry the legend of Hiram, right? But then we talk about the mythology part of it of King Solomon's temple. That's a little different. So the second thing is that there's a difference between a symbol and an emblem. And this is a very basic philosophical argument, I think. Um, I think that certain things have an inherent meaning to them. They have a form, as Plato would call it. They have a meaning in themselves. And I didn't attach that meaning. It comes with that device. Right? It comes with that. When this universe was designed, that meaning was put into that thing, so we would recognize it. So the circle gives us lots of things from cycle, the circle of things to see how things run. It gives us the idea of infinity always going around. It gives us a thing of interconnectedness. So there's lots of things going on with a circle and how it's used. If you put a circle with something, now you're developing an emblem, right? Something that means something we're giving it a view on. Um, the square, or the square, as you say, the triangle, I like to talk about the square. But remember something about the square and the circle. The circle's made by the compass, right? Compass can make all circles, and a square can measure all right angles. So they're infinite in what they can do, and therefore, in my mind, divine. And so they're divine objects because they're infinite in their what they can contain.
Yeah, I think with the triangle too, for me, when let's say I have a patient come in, I say to patients, you're made up of chemical, physical, and emotional. And the base of the triangle is the thing that holds the other two sides up. So that's what we need to look at first. And I think with the Masonics too, I look at that as it's a very strong shape because it collapses in on itself, but the base has to be level. The base is the important thing. But of course, if you rotate the pyramid, the base now changes. And that for me, I remember going into a lodge. I was invited into a lodge to have open days. This was in the UK, in Sussex, in the countryside. Little old. We live where Winnie the Pooh was written, by the way, just so you know. So Arthur Conan Doyle was down here. Virginia Woolf was down here. So many people lived down here. It's that kind of area.
Something in the water.
I think it must be. There was a program once called Why East Grinstead because we have everything from we've got the Scientologists, we've got the Rosicrucians, we've got the Opus Dei, we've got there's a lodge here, obviously. So those things, and I think that for me the square is a really fascinating thing because we tend to view the square on one plane, but if you take the square and then you put it into 3D, it's a totally different thing, right? And that's the other thing too that within the Masonics, do they look at that? Say, for example, we take the triangle, or we take a compass. Do they look at that in terms of suddenly you take a compass that's flat and you put it this now it becomes a ball?
So it depends on who you're talking to. There's a guy Albert Pike who wrote Morals and Dogma, which is very big in the United States because of the Scottish Rite. Um, the deep understanding of masonry by most masons doesn't exist, right? They there's a very surface understanding of what's going on with the square and the compass and how they're used together. Um, the thing about the I think that what you're describing a triangle, right? And the triangle, I think, is one part of an emblem, and the other part of it is the triangle inverse on it, because then you have the two together, which creates the symbol for as above, so below. It creates this. It creates the male, female. It creates all of the different junctions that you can use. So the triangle is a good teaching tool as you've used it. You've talked about the base. You've talked about the spiritual and the physical health. So it can be used that as to generate metaphor. So it's a great metaphor generator. In Freemasonry, we talk about the square. We don't talk about the triangle so much. We talk about the square, which is the tool. We talk about the tools, not the shapes. Does that make sense?
It
The
does,
tools
yeah.
themselves, the tools make the shapes, right?
Yeah.
And so the square has a variety of different meanings for Freemasonry, and it's considered an emblem of virtue because you're able to square your actions with it. And by squaring your actions, I would say for a real surface level learning is to take two of the virtues and say, does this action fall within these two virtues? And then you know it's squared and it's a proper action. So there's some mechanical things that can be done with it.
Yeah, because they talk about square and level, don't they? Everything's on the square and level. It even seeps into our culture. I know that, I talk about we use things like gut instinct, gut reaction, and there's 80% of the nerve endings in your gut. So these things are hidden, and Masonics is the same. I think there's a lot of things that have come from Masonics that people don't know. I mean, you can correct me on this, but how many of the founding fathers were Masons?
I'm not sure. Well, there were 13 signers of the Constitution who were Masons. 11 of our presidents have been Masons, and I think nine signers of the Declaration of Independence were Masons.
Because I think they,
So,
they they left England, didn't
quite
they?
a
And there
few.
was the persecution, and I think that the story I'd heard was they wanted the new world to be based on a better, more level and free. And so a lot of the American Constitution is made up of actually Masonic ideas. I think that's what I was told.
Well, you can, at the continent, at the Continental Convention, we have constitutional observance here, Freemasonry, and I spoke at one lodge. The presiding officer is George Washington, who is a master Mason, and the senior diplomat is Benjamin Franklin, another master Mason, and there are 11 other master Masons present from the states. The idea of having a Senate and a House of Representatives, the small state representation idea came from a Mason from New Jersey. So there are a lot of things that came from those men, and I don't wonder that it wasn't so much that they got the concepts from Freemasonry as that Freemasonry allowed them to explore the concepts. It gave them a space within the lodge and within other men who were talking about these things to explore those different concepts. Truth be told, your system is probably an easier to understand system of parliamentary government than ours is. Ours is a little wacky, but as a constitution goes, it's survived quite a while, so it's probably pretty good.
Yeah, because there's a lot of myth about Masonics as well. I mean, for example, my sister is a Mason, and now that might be, a lot of your listeners might be thinking, "Wow, what a woman!" I thought that women weren't allowed in the lodge, but I don't know what it's like in the States. But we have female lodges here as well. Do you have that in America as well? Is that
We
transitioned?
do. We do. I know our Grand Lodge of California does not recognize them, but we do rent our building out to them for their Grand Lodge. So, and we were talking this evening about how long it would be before women would be in the Blue Lodge here. There is co-masonry in certain states. It's not recognized by our Grand Lodge, nor I think it's probably not recognized by the Grand Lodge of England yet. But masonry is evolving as society is evolving. And eventually, I think, I'm confident that eventually masonry will be open to all peoples.
I think so. In our local town, for example, the Masons, when we have a Rotary Club event or Mayfair or something like that, they're there with the stand. There's not that hiddenness that there used to be before. So I want to talk a little bit about your book, by the way, which I am going to read because I I looked at it last night. So tell me, what's the premise of the book? What's the underlying premise of it?
So about oh my goodness, probably a decade ago, I started to do Masonic education, and one of the first educations I did was on balance and on really standing between the two columns, and the celestial and the physical, and the yin and the yang, as you referred to, and then the balance issue where the man is in the middle. And the brothers just looked at me like, well, this is all very interesting, and I got really golf claps and very polite claps, and they were just the looks on their faces. And believe me, I'm a university lecturer and was a policeman who was a primary training and gave roll call training. And if you can give roll call training to police officers and you can get them engaged, you're good. I always called it they were the Easter Island audience because they would just sit there like stone statues, the cops. Um, and if you could get them to crack a smile or to get engaged, you were doing well. Well, they weren't engaged. I thought, well, I'm not going to stop. What I got to fix this. And so what I decided is I really started to center my education in Christianity. I just took it right down to that because they all had a fundamental understanding of Christianity. Not a very deep understanding, but a fundamental understanding. We could speak the same language. And then I began to tease out very small things, and I put together lectures. As an example, I would go and I would talk about, okay, the obligation. Well, the obligation comes from the Latin word obligato. That word means, and I happen to murder Latin, by the way, but it means the thing that ties, right? So the obligation is the thing that ties you to the fraternity. Now, as a Mason, you're going to, oh, these are words I understand. The word tie and obligation. Oh, they're put together that way. There's even more to them. And then I would say, well, okay, so let's discuss what this, and I would break these words down. And then I would go and look at the Bible stories and the passages. Tonight we did a fellowcraft degree, and there's a fellowcraft degree that uses part of the book of Judges, right? And it talks about 42,000 people being killed. By the way, we do Masonic education at every meeting, every degree, every gathering. I insist on it. Um, I'll come back to that. I want to continue this other thought of how I did this. So I began to do lesson plans, and then I got invited to do a year-long seminar on all three degrees at another lodge, not mine. And I did like a graduate seminar where we had a question. I would come in with a 10-minute opener and then throw it out to the group, and we would talk about this among 30 men. And I would write stuff down, and I would see where they were going to go. And over time, I had developed all these outlines. Outlines became essays. Essays became a book, which I organized. And then it sat. It sat for 6 months because I just couldn't figure out the title. And what I did another thing too is I have a writing philosophy. My philosophy is that as the writer, to the experience, I bring 15%. You, the reader, bring 85%. You bring your imagination, your context, and this is my experience. I'll go to a university and there'll be a kid has highlighting some passage or something I wrote. I'm like, man, I didn't think that was that important to highlight. And people will find things that I didn't see in this writing because they've brought so much to it. So what I decided was these would be short magazine length, kind of 1,200 to 1,800 word articles or essays with 3 questions for reflection. And my idea was that it begins with a tagline, like a one sentence, then it explores something, and then it asks you 3 questions. And what I was hoping men would do was they would get together and they would say, well, let's just do this for a year in lodge at every meeting, take one of these essays and talk about it. And I hope you disagree with me or you find something that I said that's, crazy. I wanted to open up this dialogue. And so after a few months, I was working on another book, and actually the temple within pushed that other book out. And then I started to think, well, I got to come up with a name. And the temple within, I think, rose from the work itself. This was unnamed from the beginning. So that was the process of writing it. The first pass at the book was twice as large as the one that went out, which is normally how my work goes. It's like 220,000 words. Like, oh, we got to cut this down. So I really, really took I took an axe to it. And then I took a scalpel and then, a little bit of work with it. And it's 455 pages, probably too long, but um, I actually have another file I've started the temple within too. I don't know if there's a second book or not, but there's so let me go back to the biblical thing. So this thing about we talk about 42,000, 40 and 2,000 men were killed at this passage. And this from this passage in the Bible, we get this lesson and we talk about a single word. If you look at that, that just struck me as I remember when I first heard that, I'm like, oh, that's a lot of people, man. There's only 37,000 people in the town I live in. I mean, Angel Stadium, if they got 42,000 fans, they'd be ecstatic. And then I started thinking about it. Well, I did an analysis. Um, if you took a single day's battle, and this is, the Ephraimites are all getting murdered here in the Jordan River, a single day's battle, 42,000, and you ran it against current population. Now, this is a battle that takes place at 1000 BC or 3000 years ago. There's more death here than any other battle in the history of the world in the last 3,000 years. Okay, that's really weird to me that 3,000 years ago, somebody picked this number that's incredibly large. But here's the thing about this battle. Um, this leads down the path of the ancient Israelites, the 10 kingdoms getting dispersed to the wind and ultimately to collapse. And it certainly kills off all the Ephraimites, or pretty much does. Um, the threat came from within. There was no external threat. This was fratricide. They were killing each other. And they killed each other over the mispronunciation of a word. In organizations, what kills them is it's not an external threat, it's internal, and it's never a big issue. It's always something minor that we as human beings have to take and kill ourselves with. And so I said tonight, you look at the lodges around us that are collapsing, there's no external threat to Freemasonry. It's internal. It's us, right? And so I think organizationally, as a leader, what are the internal threats? What is it that we're doing to ourselves? And that's one of the hidden lessons. And when you start talking like that in lodge, men are like, oh, I didn't see that. Now I see it. Oh, I want to go read more. I want to talk more. Afterwards, men will come up and say, well, what about this? So that's what the book does. That, by the way, that one's not in the book. So
It's interesting. I look at because we talked about the symbology of us as above, so below, and if we let's say we take away one of those triangles and we just as above, and then we take away another one as so below, the problem I see in the world is we don't realize that the two are integrated. You need the masculine, you need the feminine. And I love your story about the Bible, because the Bible, again, if we go back to secrecy, when they got together with the Council of Nicaea, they took a lot of the stuff out of the original Bible to suit the Roman Empire at the time. Otherwise, the Roman Empire was going to collapse from within. I mean, Caesar was the one when he crossed the Rubicon that said, divide and conquer. And even things that they didn't understand that were hidden, which is very clever with the Bible, is how when Christ comes across Peter, for example, and he talks about cast your net upon the right hand side of the boat, and everybody they go over it. They think, well, why not the left hand side? And that was very clever, because anybody putting the Bible together from all the different sects at the time wouldn't have thought anything about that. But of course, we know that the right hand side is the creative side, the spiritual side. So essentially, cast your net onto the spiritual side of your personality, not the left, which is your manner that is fallen and crumbled. So I love the secrecy within the Bible, how that's managed to survive. It's very clever. And I look also, and I can't but help think that we're in the throes of that collapse within right now in the Western world. I know in England we have that, in America we have that. And I always say to people, we've got to find the commonality. We're just destroying each other. There's no threat. I mean, I'm not worried about China or Russia or whatever like that. I think it's the same thing. Would you think I mean, do you think it's a fair point?
Well, I think we're at a time of hyper transformation, and so I don't know that any transformation involves chaos and death, and that's one of the lessons from the checkerboard floor, right? Chaos and light.
Hmm.
And out of chaos comes creativity. The more chaos there is, the more creativity there is. That's the creation story. Um, and so I've been around long enough. I know everybody's so excited, but Man, the 1970s. Oh my goodness, the end of the Vietnam War. Oh my goodness, they were bombing the police. They were blowing up police cars, and they were protesting. Tens of thousands of people were in the street, and they were burning people in effigy. And oh my, my parents were considered. They were consumed. It was going to collapse. The music. Oh my goodness, the music. And today, I mean, I look at it, they're playing, the music that was all radical is in the grocery store, and Ozzy Osbourne is being, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I look at that and I go, it is dangerous. There's a lot of danger in the world, and there's a lot of transformation going on, and it's going on at a very rapid pace. And so one of the things that we should do, this is the checkerboard square, by the way. You're going to say that, that if you go in a Masonic lodge, many of them will have this black and white tiles, right? And the guys will tell you, well, you're going to make decisions through life. You got to make right and wrong decisions. Okay, well, that's true. But if you walk on that floor, you can't walk on all white tiles. You've got to step on the black ones, right? And here's the thing: the more you're seated in your value system, the light, the better you will endure or be able to take the chaos. And so the deeper your value system is, and the way in your belief system, the more chaos you can handle. But you've got to expect the chaos, and the chaos is going to be part of your life. And so I think that we see lots of transformation going on with the world, and that's one of the things that, if you look at my book, it's dedicated to my grandchildren, in hopes, and one of them is 28, and one of them is 2, and there are 5 of them in there, and I've dedicated to them in the hopes that they find light in this book somewhere. I believe that they will. So when you have that, you see that, you got to think, well, we're going to make it through this and come out the other side a little stronger.
It's poetic what you actually just said there, about the square. It was actually quite beautiful. I was listening to it. I thought, wow, that's so beautiful, because my own experience of life is that I this phrase I have, which is faith is nothing if not tested, right? So we can all say, oh, we want to be on the white squares all the time, but the reality is, when I'm getting too heavenly that I'm of no earthly good, and my ego is becoming inflated, what tends to happen is, God comes along and goes, right, okay, it's going to give you a black square, right? Let's test your faith. Let's see under fire, whether you can really, now you're, from your time in the police, everyone can have a gun and everyone can say, this is how you enter a room and this is the protocol for an arrest. But the reality is, people don't just put their hands behind their back and say, yeah, come on, cuff me, copper. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. And the police come under a lot of flack in the UK. We have the police come under a lot of flack. I always say, when you need the police, you love them, but when you don't need them, you hate them, right? And you're right. Vietnam. I mean, you think about Bob Dylan. His lyrics were very radical at the time. And I would say the music of that time was beautiful because it was poetic. I don't really see the poetry in a lot of music now. I think that there's a lot of that's been lost. But I do think that when you've been around long enough, you've seen the end of the world loads and times over and again. And then the young are always going, "Oh, the world's going to end." I said, "Yeah, well, it's kind of ended so many times before." So I do, but I love. I've never heard it explained the way you did about the yin and yang in terms of the checkerboard and the light and the dark, and it made me thought. I've heard this like in Buddhism, I've heard it in Islam, I've heard it in Christianity. It's a fundamental truth, and even in the Bible, I can't quote this exact. You probably know better than me, but something lines of, in my father's house there are many rooms, in the sense that there's room for all of us and there's room for commonality. But I think we've become so. Have you ever come across somebody called Ramdas? He's an American. Do you know
No.
Ramdas at all? So basically, he's like a kind of he went to India, became a bit of a guru. But he's the biggest problem we have in the world is we still living with this idea that it's them, and we got to get back to the fact that it's us. And when we find the commonality, it brings us together. So with your
Well,
book,
that's the
sorry,
the
go ahead.
yeah, that's the point of the temple within, though. I mean, that's why I got that. That's the whole point of the exercise. All this stuff external to you is external to you. If you don't like the outcome of your life, you need to change what you're doing.
Totally.
It's yours, right? So I think it's the other thing about the checkerboard. We call it the tessellated, right? It's got the golden border around it. The guys and guys will, these are God's rules, or no, what did it say? This is you're always surrounded by the divine. No, no. Think about it this way. Think about it that there are rules. There are spiritual and physical rules. There are rules. We don't know them all. We see them interact, and so we make up stories to help us understand them. It's like I'm on a virtual world tour for my these two books I have going right now. They're both concurrent. And I spoke in the Netherlands to pagans, right? And we talked about magic. And I said to them, I said, well, you know what magic is? It's something we don't understand. That's all. When you think about the god of war, the god of Mars, and why they said there was a god of war, it's because they saw people get really mad and they saw somebody who was normal get so angry they got overtaken by something, so they must be possessed. Well, we now know it's chemical, right? We know there's all these forces inside of
Yeah.
ourselves. The more we understand the rules, the better off we can operate in the environment. And that's the tessellation around us is encouraging us to try to understand both the physical and spiritual rules. And of course, as above, so below, right? They're pretty much the same.
I agree. And also, we are created after all with free will. And a lot of people go, oh, what if all this horrible things going on in the world, why does God allow it? Well, it's not God allowing it. God gives us free will. You can't give somebody free will and then take it away from them when it's appropriate to you. We have to learn and we have to grow. And within Christianity too, I think the Masons have come under a lot of attack about secrecy. But within Christianity, a lot of Christians don't know their own history. For example, look at the Christmas tree. That was a shaman thing. The presents under the tree come from not from psilocybin, from flygaric, which was the red and white mushroom. Santa Claus wears red and white, so they take the flygaric, have hallucinogenic experiences, and leave presents underneath the Christmas tree for the gods. So I think that the Roman Empire saw that they had to integrate these beliefs in order to incorporate and become powerful. And Christianity is full of these things. Easter's an Egyptian thing, and it also comes from the Kundalini and the Jacob's ladder, and and I think fear is the one thing that I've seen that's used as a control. If you make people afraid, you can control them, and I think the Masonics is the opposite, actually, and they've made it fearful, but I think that comes from an ignorance, to be honest.
Santa Claus is a really good metaphor for this. Um, you know, the truth is, I love Christmas, but I also know that everything I love about Christmas was made up about 100 years ago by the Coca-Cola Corporation, so they
100%.
could sell Coca-Cola, right? But see, what they did was they tapped into the myth that I love,
Mhm.
and they sold Coca-Cola with it. That doesn't make the myth any less powerful just because these fellows made a way to use it. So we have to be really careful. And this is what we've done for the last 75 years in our deconstruction of myths and our deconstruction of philosophy. Because when you deconstruct stuff down so far that it has no value, but there is value in it. We have to give the value back into it. And so one of the things, again, I'm very careful in the writing is that I want to deconstruct things for you. I want to take you down a layer. And masonry, like the Bible, what did Christ use parables? What are those if not riddles? The Aesop's fables, they're riddles. And masonry is a giant riddle because and this is my opinion, you just can't tell people because they reject it. They've got to experience it. In fact, I'm going to tell you, if you ever find out the secrets of a master mason, you will be unable to tell another human being. You will be unable to express it to another human being. That's what the secret is. It's something that you can only be led the journey. You can take the journey and you can take the experience, right? But you can't be given it. And I think that's why we use parable, fable, myth, analogy, metaphor, symbol because we can't give it away. It has to be pursued and experienced.
No, I totally agree, but also the student has to seek, right? So when the student, my book I wrote was called "When the Student is Ready, the Master Will Appear," and the irony is we're looking for that master externally, but actually the master is within, and yeah, so we look at one of the things that I find interesting. It parallels your life to some extent, which is that how my life has taken me down the healthcare route and the healing route. And when I come away from healing, my life doesn't work. When I go back to it, it does. So when I'm working with patients, I'm I'm trying to sort of gently sort of say to them that you're more than, just this physical body. So if we look at colostrum, for example, in part of the brain, and how that relates again to the chemical change that one can incorporate into the body. I mean, humans are able to generate DMT, for example,
Right.
and in the brain, and the body is electric, and we have a piezoelectric stuff called spinal fluid. So these techniques, but they were hidden for a reason, as you say, because if you take an 18-year-old and you show them a martial arts technique as a thing, as a three-strike technique in martial arts, given it to an 18-year-old, they're going to use it the wrong way. And I think the esoteric teachings, even the Kabbalistic teachings, is you don't teach anybody until they're 40 because their ego is not able to deal with it, not able to handle it. And when I was younger, I was like, why are all these old guys not teaching me these things and showing me these things? So when I went into a lodge, of course, I'm asking these people, I was a young guy, went into a lodge and I'm asking some of these Masons, what does this mean? And what does this mean? And they said, oh, I don't know. They did know, but they understood that they weren't telling me because they were necessarily being secretive. They weren't telling me because you can't unknow something. There's a consequence to knowledge, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so that's my take on it.
Tonight we did a fellowcraft degree about 3 hours ago, and he's very young. He's like 22, and at the end of the degree is over with now, and we're in men are standing up, and I give my little education. Before I do that, I said, first off, I want to either congratulate you and congratulate the officers on a great degree, and congratulate you. I want to say two things to you right now. Number one, as an old man, and I am an old man, um, it is thrilling to see you here because I see the journey before you. You're 22 years old, and what lies before you is exciting, and I hope that you take that. Number two is there are two powerful ways of knowing, and tonight we've showed them to you, and you may lose sight of them. But one is participatory knowing, and the other is perspectival knowing. If you participate with us, you will know this philosophy. If you participate and change your position through either becoming an officer or moving around the room, you'll change your perspective. Being here and being with us. And so to see the young people, I can't tell you, I can see your journey ahead of you, but I can't give it to you. I could just shrug my shoulders and laugh.
Yeah, it reminds me of Cat Stevens. I think it was the song he wrote, "Oh So Very Young." You can't help it, you're young. One day maybe you'll get married. Something like that. So it's a very I love that time in history. I think it was very poetic in what they were talking about. So in terms of your book, because I always want to come back to your book, because I know as an author, it's very important that we talk about your book. Was there sort of this enlightenment moment where you just one day woke up and thought, I've got to write this down, or what was that moment for you?
Well, I don't know. It forced its way out. It forced its way out. There's no, and I don't write with an aha moment, so it just came out. So no enlightenment moment on it. I still don't understand where it's going. I don't know. I can't. I know it's going. I just don't understand where it's going yet. And I live a lot of my life that way. I mean, I can see that I should go this way, but I don't know where it's going. And I guess that this is a fundamental thing. You've said this a couple of times. You've talked about gut instinct. You've talked about free will. You've talked about I think indirectly about karma. I think one of the big and hidden mysteries of Freemasonry, and I discuss this in my book, is the Freemasonry is a methodology whereby we can tame our unconscious mind, and that's the point of Freemasonry. I think our conscious mind is constantly busy. It's overwhelmed, right? It's trying to not get killed. But our subconscious sits in the background, I think, and it watches for the thing we really, really want. And when it sees it, it tickles us because it can't talk to us. It tickles us. It shows us an image or gives us a
Mm.
feeling. We call that instinct. We call that gut instinct. And it probably explains why, some people always get a bad relationship. That's because that's what they're really looking for.
I agree.
Karma is not getting what you deserve. Karma is getting what you're looking for. That's the better explanation of it,
I
I
agree.
think.
I
And
agree.
so the subconscious mind is trained. It's training your subconscious mind to look for advantage. And so we have this whole thing. I've seen these books, The Secret, The Secret, manifesting things. No, 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 no. You can't make things out of thin air, but you can see more clearly. And if you can train your subconscious mind to look for the things you want or need, it will find them. And then if you learn to listen to it. And so Freemasonry teaches us, and it takes a biblical passage at the very beginning. It's the first lesson we teach a Mason. They don't even know it. They're not even in the room yet. They're not even made a Mason yet. We teach them this lesson. And it comes to ask, seek, and knock, right? Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open unto you. These are not declarative statements. They're independent. They're dependent clauses. They depend on each other. We don't think before we speak. I mean, I've never heard anybody that said, "I wish I hadn't thought before I spoke." I wish I had thought before. We speak. We speak first. We're speaking people. We make these sounds, and then we think about it. And I make this guarantee to your listeners. This is in my book, but I make this guarantee to this podcast. If you do this thing, magic will happen. And magic is defined as something you don't understand that happens.
Hmm.
But something magical will happen to you. If you do this 3 times, and we could discuss why three, it's not necessarily a magic number, but it is imprinted on the human psyche. Carl Jung explains it better
Yeah.
than I do, but it's imprinted on
I
our
think at three,
psyche.
6, and 9, Tesla talks about 3, 6, and 9 as well, and the
Yeah,
energetics.
there's
Yeah.
all yeah, there's all kinds of reasons. The
Yeah.
Greek parts of speech are three. I think that's the basic one, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. If you decide you want to do something, they tell you if you're going to make goals, you should write them down. Think about that. I'm going to say what they are, but I'm going to think about them, and then I'm going to take an action, which is writing them down.
Yeah.
If you take an action, you do this process 3 times. You speak, you think, and by thinking you refine what you spoke about, and you take an action toward whatever that is, as small as the action. Well, you create a groove in your subconscious, and that groove will see something your conscious mind doesn't see. It'll see an opportunity to forward that goal, push the ball further down the field. And this is a powerful if you think about every degree that we do, we teach this over and over and over and over and over again. We inculcate this, the crap out of this. How do you train your subconscious mind to work for you and not against you? And that's what I think
Yeah.
one of the
I totally agree, and I think that once you write something down, you're manifesting it into the physical world. Whereas things like with The Secret and that, they stop at that thought process. But the thought process is just a bubble, that's popping. You need to, if you physically write it, it's now manifest on a piece of paper. It's physical, and I think the universe, sort of, whatever you want to call it, universe, God, it stands there just waiting for you, to make your mind up, And it says when you figure out what you want, it'll manifest that. But most of us, we do ourselves in, we don't manifest, we're scared of manifesting, we're worried, we're indoctrinated. I mean, a lot of people, with even in Christianity, I've seen it, nobody really wants to talk about Christ when he was 12 years old. They don't want to talk about his time in Tibet and in places like that, And if I look at the Bible, and you can see that the teachings from many, many cultures within that. But again, I think it's fear. I think people are afraid to stand up and be counted. So as such. So wow.
Okay, I'm not a okay, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I'm not a biblical scholar by any means. And I think I might be close to becoming a Masonic scholar, but I don't know that I am yet. But I'm getting close. But I'm nowhere a biblical scholar. But here's especially the New Testament, especially what happens in the New Testament. Um, you have the Roman Empire, and it's divided really into two languages. In the Mediterranean side, they speak Greek, and in the other side, they speak Latin. And so, in the part which has Judea in it, they're speaking Greek, and they got to learn Greek. So all of the Pharisees and Sadducees, they learn Greek. And they learn Greek. They learn all the Greek philosophies and all the Greeks. What did the Greeks do, man? Alexander the Great was all the way into India. They drug all that stuff back with them. And so they learned the philosophies because they were studying Greek. What were you going to read? If you're going to learn Greek, you're going to read Greek. What did they write in Greek? They wrote Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, and they're going to read all that stuff. And so now Jewish mysticism is being combined with Greek political and philosophical thought. What do you get? You get Christianity, I think. I
Yeah.
think you get that flows up from that experience. And why does it spread? Well, because there are roads at that time. I mean, that's where he walks along the paths. Um, and, and if you want to, here's the way I like to read it. I was talking to somebody the other day. I go, hey, you want to read an adventure novel? And they go, well, what's it? I go, well, there's a guy. And he's walking down the road and he sees a ghost. And then he gets arrested and he does a jailbreak and there's a shipwreck and he's persecuted. And then that's the story of Paul, right?
Mm.
There's a shipwreck and there's a jailbreak.
Yeah.
There's all these things that go on in that book that are, well, fascinating.
Yeah, the Bible's so
And so,
rich. I mean, it's very rich, isn't it? But it's again, we get back to we full circle round. We come back to the circle and how the myth, right? And Christ was very clever because he spoke in parables because we love a story. We love a story. And I think the Masonic tradition is full of richness and stories and tradition. And I think people don't realize that. And when you join lodge, my understanding of it is that you learn these stories and they're beautiful stories. Um, but it takes courage to not break a promise. And I think that's we go all the way back to how do we recognize another Mason, and that's the courage because anybody can just, the mark of a man. If I tell you something, are you going to, but somebody that like my father was in the Secret Service. My father, if he was ever tortured, he couldn't tell anybody anything, it's the same thing. So listen, this is I'm fascinated. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I have learned more about the Masonic tradition in this conversation than any book I've ever read. So definitely going to read your book. Now, if people want to buy your book, that's the first thing. Where did they get it?
well, it's go to Amazon, especially in the UK. And as a writer, you could say whatever bad things you want to say about Amazon. The fact that the print on demand is there in the UK means that the shipping is very simple. Its payments are easy. You avoid all kinds of tax issues. Even though I get paid and will get paid in pounds, it gets translated into dollars easily for me. So go to Amazon there. That's the easiest way. There are other platforms that it's available, but I think that's the one that people have the best experience with.
They're going
And
to
so
resonate
that's what
with.
I recommend.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they can get it in Amazon. And if anybody wants to reach out to you, how would you do it? Because I know a lot of when I come across an author I particularly like, sometimes I want to write to them, and I always know that when people get in contact with me, there's only so many emails you can answer. But so, what's the safest way for people to get hold of you?
Yeah. So, after I was a policeman, I taught at university for 10 years and I started my own consulting company, right? And I actually lived in the Caribbean for a couple of years and I did consulting for the EU and I had a really good time. But I started a high-tech criminal justice. So I have this domain, HITECHCJ, hightechcj.com. So it's now been morphed into my writing site and it's easy. It's been there forever. Hightechcj.com. You can see three of my books are up there: The Temple Within, Leadership, Texas Hold'em Style, and Chasing the Surge. Chasing the Surge just came out. I'm a great technical writer. I'm, I'm told. I mean, I've got practice now in writing textbooks. I want to write fiction badly, and I didn't know how to do it. And so what I did was um, I found a way I could gather stories and then I could write scenes and do dialogue. What I did was I took a job as an Uber driver and I did 10,000 rides. And so I've published Chasing the Surge, 10,000 Rides into the American Night. And it's me learning, me changing as a human being. I'm the story arc, but it's also me learning to write fiction. So that's up there. There's contact information. You can send me a letter to a PO box. You can send me an email. It may take me a while, but I will answer the email. So
I'm the same. It takes me a while because I'm either, next thing I'm sort of treating patients in pain and got problems and stuff, and it's like, and I have to compartmentalize. My wife being a university lecturer as well, she understands what that's like. You have to sort of turn off. So tradition, we love tradition. So as we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, so I have a tradition on Zen Footsteps, and I ask you for a favorite quote, but I also want to know why.
yeah, it's not something I wrote.
It's fine,
It's
doesn't have to
general.
be. I mean, you can
Yeah,
see
it's
the Gandhi
general.
Gandhi quote behind me, be the change you want to see in the world, so
It's General George S. Patton, and this has ruled my life, and I didn't know it. But what he said was, it doesn't matter how far you climb or how far you fall. It matters how big you bounce. And so
Oh, that's tickled
that's
me.
that's my I live like that. I mean, I live like it doesn't that's not how and because your life is like that, man. You're gonna
Yeah,
crash, and it's not the crash, it's the
yeah,
bounce. You get a bounce.
yeah.
And so it
It's
doesn't
the
matter how far you
journey.
climb. That's right. Doesn't matter how far you climb
Yeah.
or how far you fall. It matters how big you bounce.
I love that. I mean, I always say it's the journey. I think in one of my podcasts, I'm going to repeat myself. We can take a bicycle or we can take a plane. We're all going to get there in the end. And everybody's so focused on getting there, but actually the journey is the path. It really is. So it's fascinating. Well, listen, thank you. I'm going to get this out. This is going to just for all my listeners. This is coming out on the first, which is tomorrow, I think. Yeah, first of what do we September, October. So that'll be out. And please do reach out to Raymond. His book, I'm going to be reading it. I'm going to have it on the bookshelf with all the thousands of books we have on our house. But Raymond, thank you. I really appreciate your time. And I know it's late, so I'm going to let you go and get some sleep. But lovely
Well,
to
thank you
chat.
so much. It was. And anytime you would like me to, if you'd like me to come back, I'm 100% available to you. I will answer your email immediately.
Good. Take care then. Take care. Bye.